I hope you have a wonderful weekend plan. A good Valentine's Day to everyone who is celebrating on Friday, and for those who forgot, on Saturday. I want to begin by promising you I will get to Vice President Vance's speech in the next segment. I will talk to Matt Continetti. I will talk to Ben Domenech. I will talk to Jim Garrity about President Trump's moves on Ukraine and Russia, about China's threat to us, about what may or may not happen in Israel tomorrow on Saturday. I do want to make sure I cover all the news, but I want to start with the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, OPM, because there is much hand-wringing. Today, the Department of Interior announced it was firing 2,300 probationary employees. This follows a directive from OPM that every probationary employee in the federal government be dismissed. That's not even remotely controversial. You get a probation period, and if for reasons of budget or performance, people don't like you, out you go. Donald Trump has said, we don't have any money. We have to downsize the federal government so that we can focus on things that matter. And therefore, for example, in January, all of the offers to law students to join the Department of Justice honors program, all of them were rescinded. I personally would end the Department of Justice honors program because the best law students in the country actually go to clerk for federal judges. They don't go to the honors program. Moreover, the Department of Justice can always go let big law train a lawyer for 2 or 3 years and then bring them in, or they can go find the best assistant United States attorneys and bring them in. They don't have to hire first-year law students. There's no reason for it. There wasn't a reason for it when I saw it working and operating long ago. I wasn't an honors department guy. I joined the Department of Justice from the D.C. Circuit, but I went in as a Schedule C, not the honors program. And I always scratched my head. We had a lot of lawyers. These were not the best lawyers. These were kids. They were coming out of law school. They'd never practiced a day in their life. They hadn't even passed the bar. And to me, it always seemed unusual that DOJ just didn't say to the U.S. Attorney's Office, we need to restock Main Justice. But that's a small number of things. By the way, it's also what big law does when they're out of money. Big law rescinds or delays offers. So you'll find Cravath or Hogan and Hartson or someone out there, one of the bigs. Oh, Melvin E. Gibson Dunn. Gibson was my firm. They will either extend an offer as long as you want if they really want you, or they'll say to an entire class, things aren't so good, sorry, check in a year. Or they'll just withdraw the offer. And it's a tentative offer, and you have no standing to sue. As for OPM, I speak as the former general counsel of OPM, 1986 and 87, the former deputy director, 87, 88, the former acting director, 88, 89. I was confirmed as deputy director by the Senate. General counsel was SES level 6. So they're serious jobs. There are a lot of fine people among the 2.3 million federal employees. Some of them are listening to me right now. I don't think OPM could function without its 30 to 40 lawyers. Even though the agency itself has 6,000 people when I was there, I don't know how many people it has now. Might have more or less, I don't know. But the lawyers at OPM deal with all the problems of the 2.3 million civilian workers that the general counsel's offices and the human resources offices of all the other federal agencies can't deal with. And they make sure they provide advice, they provide guidance that people are not breaking the law. So if OPM said to the agents, and it did, you can lay off your probationary employees, that's absolutely going to be correct. I also want to go a step further. Federal law was codified in 1978 in something called the Civil Service Reform Act of 1978. Jimmy Carter's only major piece of legislation, and it was a bad one. It took the Civil Service Commission and broke it into 3 different agencies, the larger of which is OPM. But there's Merit System Protection Board, other things. And they put in new systems because they had to move, especially they had to move for defined benefit pensions to defined contribution retirement programs in a blended program called the Thrift Savings Program, TSP. And They had to reform the Federal Employees Health Benefits Program, and they had to reform the background checks, and they had to do a bunch of other things. And so it was only 8 years old when I reached there, and it was a mess. It was an absolute mess. It's gotten worse. It's gotten so worse that Team Trump is attempting to trigger a constitutional challenge to the impingements on the president's authority to hire and fire. Those impingements are quite enormous. Right now, there are about, I believe, 3,000 political appointees, Schedule Cs and advise and consent appointees total. There are 2.3 million federal civilian employees. That's not enough political supervision. If I were the president, and I'm not, or if I was the head of OPM, and I have no interest in being that, I would send out a directive to the 2.3 million and ask, how many of you were ever a political appointee, and was there a break in service between your appointment as a Schedule C or SES political reserve and your conversion to to career status? Because that's called burrowing, and burrowing is bad. Because burrowing puts ideologues of both the right and the left into the federal civil service. We don't want them there. We want the federal civil service to be non-ideological people. We don't want them to be the resistance. We don't want them pulling oars for one team or the other. They're supposed to be professionals, and most of them are. But like everything, there's a bell curve. There is a bell curve in everything. So 10% of those 2.3 million federal employees, civilians, are the best. You don't want to lose them. I know some of them. They're usually in the SES. Not always, but they're usually. And 10% of them are the worst. Now, I can also say 10% of all the GS7s are the worst GS7s, and 10% of the GS7s are the best GS7s. And 10% of the SES Level 3 are career are the best, and some are the worst. 10% are the worst. There's a bell curve in everything. We have to chop off the worst 10%, and the next year, the next 10%, and the next year, the next 10%. Because the federal government has grown out of control. It's a super-sized workforce, and it's tenured, and they get a step-in grade increase every year, and they move around to get a level increase as often as they can. It's a game. It's a game, and it is ridiculously hard to fire an employee who acts inappropriately, does not do their job, or refuses to be accountable. Ridiculously hard. That's what the MSPB is. I'm not against the president downsizing the government. You shouldn't be either, because we are running close to a $2 trillion deficit every year. We can't afford 2.3 million people. Now, there are other things that are going to be cut. The budget resolution is going to pass. We'll get an outline. A lot of that's going to be in Medicaid. And I'll spend some time next week talking about Medicaid. But I'm here to tell you, do not cry for me, Argentina, when it comes to shrinking the federal government. Everybody has to do this. I had to do it on my second tour at the Nixon Foundation because COVID hit. A lot of our revenue went away. I've had to do it as a managing partner at law firms. I've had to consent to it as just a partner in law firms. When recessions come, workforces have to shrink. Now, I've blessedly never been fired. All right, so it's blessedly never been fired. I know it's difficult, but it's not the end of the world, especially if you're a federal employee. You might want to leave D.C. where it's ridiculously expensive to live if you lost your job, and you might have the greatest thing in the world happen to you by not going into the federal government, which frustrates most people unless they're really in the senior executive service or a GS-15 or on a special pay scale. You might want to go somewhere other in the country than the Beltway because it's not a good place to live your entire life. Some people do, and they emerge unscathed. People with a good church, people with a good family circle, people who are not trapped by the federal disease, who don't talk shop 24/7, who aren't always trying to manipulate the bureaucracy to move up. But it's not a normal place. You're not going to be friends at church or synagogue or temple or mosque with the guy at Jiffy Lube. You're not going to be down the street from the kindergarten teacher. It's all government all the time. It's not what we were supposed to be. So downsizing the federal government, don't shed any tears. Feel bad for people for whom it is inconvenient. Maybe people who have a sick spouse, maybe someone for whom it's a unique hardship. But generally speaking, downsizing the federal government by 10 to 20%, not a bad thing. Increasing the amount of political appointees, a good thing. Making sure that there are no, quote, resistance people, a better thing. OPM, do your job. And whoever is going to do that for Donald Trump, God bless you, because it's not completely thankless, but it's pretty close. Vice President Vance gave a very important speech at the Munich Defense Conference on Friday. I recommend you find it and watch it. The whole thing is only 25 minutes. But here are some highlights. Cut number one.
Europeans, the people, have a voice. European leaders have a choice. And my strong belief is that we do not need to be afraid of the future. You can embrace what your people tell you, even when it's surprising, even when you don't agree. And if you do so, you can face the future with certainty and with confidence, knowing that the nation stands behind each of you. And that, to me, is the great magic of democracy. It's not in these stone buildings or beautiful hotels. It's not even in the great institutions that we have built together as a shared society. To believe in democracy is to understand that each of our citizens has wisdom and has a voice. And if we refuse to listen to that voice, even our most successful fights will secure very little. As Pope John Paul II, in my view, one of the most extraordinary champions of democracy on this continent or any other, once said, "Do not be afraid." We shouldn't be afraid of our people.
He said that again and again and again. Good for you, Vice President Vance. He continued cut number two.
No voter on this continent went to the ballot box to open the floodgates to millions of unvetted immigrants. But you know what they did vote for? In England, they voted for Brexit, and agree or disagree, they voted for it. And more all over Europe, they're voting for political leaders who promise to put an end to out-of-control migration. Now, I happen to agree with a lot of these concerns, but you don't have to agree with me. I just think that people care about their homes, they care about their dreams, they care about their safety and their capacity to provide for themselves and their children. And they're smart. I think this is one of the most important things I've learned in my brief time in politics. Contrary to what you might hear a couple mountains over in Davos, the citizens of all of our nations don't generally think of themselves as educated animals or as interchangeable cogs of a global economy. And it's hardly surprising that they don't want to be shuffled about or relentlessly ignored by their leaders.
Bravo, Vice President Vance. He continued worrying or urging countries not to worry too much. Cut number three.
Now, we're at the point, of course, that the situation has gotten so bad that this December, Romania straight up canceled the results of a presidential election based on the flimsy suspicions of an intelligence agency and enormous pressure from its continental neighbors. Now, as I understand it, the argument was that Russian disinformation had infected the Romanian elections. But I'd ask my European friends to have some perspective. You can believe it's wrong for Russia to buy social media advertisements to influence your elections. We certainly do. You can condemn it on the world stage even. But if your democracy can be destroyed with a few $100,000 of digital advertising from a foreign country, then it wasn't very strong to begin with.
Excellent point. The Vice President even made a joke. Cut number four.
And expressing opinions isn't election interference. Even when people express views outside your own country, and even when those people are very influential. And trust me, I say this with all humor, if American democracy can survive 10 years of Greta Thunberg scolding, you guys can survive a few months of Elon Musk.
It's actually pretty funny. Cut number five.
But while the Trump administration is very concerned with European security and believes that we can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine, and we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense, the threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within. The retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America.
Especially freedom of religion. Cut number 7.
And unfortunately, when I look at Europe today, it's sometimes not so clear what happened to some of the Cold War's winners. I look to Brussels, where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content. Or to this very country, where police have carried out raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online as part of, quote, combating misogyny on the internet, a day of action. I look to Sweden, where 2 weeks ago the government convicted a Christian activist for participating in Koran burnings that resulted in his friend's murder. And as the judge in his case chillingly noted, Sweden's laws to supposedly protect free expression do not, in fact, grant, and I'm quoting, a free pass to do or say anything without risking offending the group that holds that belief. And perhaps most concerningly, I look to our very dear friends, the United Kingdom, where the backslide away from conscience rights has placed the basic liberties of religious Britons in particular in the crosshairs. A little over 2 years ago, the British government charged Adam Smith Connor, a 51-year-old physiotherapist and an Army veteran, with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes. Not obstructing anyone, not interacting with anyone, just silently praying on his own. And after British law enforcement spotted him and demanded to know what he was praying for, Adam replied simply, it was on behalf of the unborn son he and his former girlfriend had aborted years before. Now, the officers were not moved. Adam was found guilty of breaking the government's new buffer zones law, which criminalizes silent prayer and other actions that could influence a person's decision within 200 meters of an abortion facility. He was sentenced to pay thousands of pounds in legal costs to the prosecution. Now, I wish I could say that this was a fluke, a one-off crazy example of a badly written law being enacted against a single person. But no, this last October, just a few months ago, the Scottish government began distributing letters to citizens whose houses lay within so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law. Naturally, the government urged readers to report any fellow citizens suspected guilty of thought crime. In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat.
Good for the vice president. Go and find the whole thing. It's very easily accessible. It's only 25 minutes. Those are some of the highlights. Matt Continetti is the senior director at the American Enterprise Institute for Domestic Policy Studies. He's also a columnist at the Washington Free Beacon and a contributor in my ear almost every day on the Commentary Podcast, which is my must-listen, my first go-to podcast. He wasn't there, though, this morning, Matt, and so I missed you. I'm glad you're here to talk to me. I want to begin, and I warned you that I would, with the attack on Elbridge Colby, nominated to be Undersecretary of Defense, the number 3 position, by anonymous sources in the Hill, and allegedly one anonymous senator on the Republican side, which I don't believe. But what do you think about Bridge Colby at DOD?
Well, I've known Bridge for 20-some years, Hugh. We met as kids just out of college, making our way in George W. Bush's Washington. And Bridge was always a critic of George W. Bush's foreign policy, and that's something he has been very consistent about over the decades. And he's eminently qualified. I have my disagreements with him on a few issues, whether it's Ukraine or Iran, for example, whether it's a kind of the linkage between, say, American security in Europe and American security in East Asia. But there's no doubt to my mind that he's qualified to hold the position for which he's been nominated, which again is it's a policy planning position in the Pentagon, but of course it's under not just Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, but President Trump will be making the policy.
Yeah, a friend of the show and your colleague on the Commentary Podcast suggested, John Podhoretz, suggested yesterday that Bridge is ultra MAGA. He's not. He's a China hawk, and the China hawks are kind of Reaganauts, dated, updated, and ready for the 21st century. Do you think he's ultra MAGA?
Well, he's part of the MAGA movement, as I think most people who are going to work for President Trump are. And he's definitely a China hawk. And I do think that this administration is taking China very seriously. There's an argument in the foreign policy community on the right between people who believe that America needs to really maintain our role as the securator, the guarantor of global security around the world, or whether we should make priorities and prioritization and prioritize the defense against China as the number one pacing threat. And Bridge is definitely on the side of the prioritizers. In fact, he's probably their leading theorist, and I think that's why he could have significant influence in the Pentagon if he gets confirmed into this position.
I do think, I'm looking forward to his hearing. I hope they talk about what do we do if we see ro-ros and aircraft carriers in the Taiwan Strait. I think the answer is there will be Virginia-class submarines there, and leave it at that. Matt, I want to move on now to Ukraine, Russia, then China, then Israel, and then J.D. Vance's speech in Europe. We got time, but I want to lay out where we're going. What did you make of President Trump's call to Putin, his post about it, then his call to Zelensky, and then J.D. Vance's comments about with President Zelensky today in Munich?
Well, I think President Trump is beginning to launch the peace initiative that he pledged he would launch on the campaign trail. He wants the Ukraine war to end. But I think he also wants to do it in a way that secures Ukraine for the long term. And so President Trump, what we know of him over his 2 terms is he's not afraid to talk to people who are the leaders of rogue nations or are considered by the foreign policy community to be beyond the pale. And so he has this outreach to Putin, which he then followed up with outreach to Zelensky. And he appointed his team, which includes the Vice President, Secretary of State Rubio, and National Security Advisor Waltz. And I think what we've seen play out over the course of the week is the administration doing some, it seems to me, negotiating with itself. It's not, you had Secretary Hegseth say, well, we know that at the end of this process, Ukraine won't become a member of NATO. But then he kind of walked that back. And then we had J.D. Vance in the Wall Street Journal ahead of his speech to the Munich conference today saying, well, everything is on the table, including the use of American forces if Vladimir Putin does not abide by the agreement. I might expect him to walk that back as well. I think this is the opening bid in a process that's going to take a long time, Hugh. And my major concern is, of course, that we negotiate from a position of strength and that we also recognize that Putin will not take any peace agreement seriously unless it is backed up with the real threat of force and sanction. And so that, I think, is an important principle that I'm sure the team is aware of as they enter this process.
I would recommend everyone listen to Thursday's edition of the Commentary Podcast for a robust discussion of grand strategy. I think that's what Donald Trump is doing in a reversion to Richard Nixon going to China. He's trying to go to Russia and trying to get there after a ceasefire in Ukraine. They discussed it thoroughly yesterday. So, Matt, I viewed the whole week as Nixonian. I went to work for him when I was 22 years old, and so he had a major impact. And he just threw everyone overboard when he went to China. I think Donald Trump is a realist in terms of not having any particular configuration of the world in his mind. I did like your argument yesterday about the neo-manifest destiny at work here. I don't think we're going to make Canada the 51st state. I don't think we're going to have to invade Panama. But he wants China out of our hemisphere. He wants everyone out of our hemisphere. And to that end, I think he will be dealing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think President Trump has always had the sense that the global system has not been working to America's advantage, that we spend too much money basing our troops overseas. We don't get much back for it, in his view, that the world trade system hasn't benefited America, and so we need to be tougher in our trade negotiations. And he's had these views for decades, Hugh, and now in his second term, having been vindicated, having engaged in the greatest political comeback in American history, he feels empowered, and I think rightly so, to pursue his vision for America and the world. And it's a different vision than the type of foreign policies that we're used to. But foreign policies, by the way, that have not been entirely successful for the United States for a variety of reasons. And so what he's trying to do, it seems to me, is reorient American foreign policy, hearkening back to earlier time periods where our focus really was on the homeland and on the Western Hemisphere. And we essentially allowed other powers with our allies to take care of their own problems. Of course, that was Nixon as well, as you well know. The Nixon doctrine was the idea that we would supply our allies to handle their own challenges, but we would not intervene directly.
And the Shanghai Communique was the first demonstration of realpolitik that I think we might see come out of some negotiation between Putin and our team, with Zelensky on the side being asked to accept it. I think there are acceptable results. I'm hoping for a ceasefire that benefits, because, Matt, do you think the American people have any idea of the scale of suffering in this war? It is, for Ukraine, 10 Vietnams, and they haven't got any population or economy like ours, but they've lost like 10 times the people we lost in Vietnam.
Well, they've lost an incredible number of soldiers. They've lost an incredible number of civilians. The population of Ukraine has shrunk because many Ukrainians have left the country, and they're in terrible shape. For me, the best outcome would be one where Ukraine retains its democracy and is able to continue its desired path for integration in the West and to promote economic freedom and political freedom. And if that means that there's going to be some trade-offs in order to get to that outcome, that might just be the reality that we have to accept. Unfortunately, foreign policy is never perfect. There's never 100% solutions here. And so, again, what we think about is President Trump bringing to this new realism the sensibility of peace through strength, something that he's talked about on the campaign trail.
And I hope so. 60 years of realism that began with Richard Nixon in 1968 and will conclude with Donald Trump in 2028, has had within it an ideological spike. And that spike was Ronald Reagan staring down Gorbachev in the Soviet Union and doing so via SDI. Do you think there is within Donald Trump's realism, Matt Continenti, an ideological spike concerning Xi, the CCP, and the People's Liberation Army Navy, and the threat to Taiwan? Because we can't give them the South China Sea. We just can't do that.
No, I don't think so. And I think that an expansionist China would definitely be a threat to American liberty. And look, President Trump has made China an issue in American politics. Let's not forget that prior to his descent down the escalator in 2015, the consensus was that China was a partner, or that China was going to be a responsible stakeholder in the international system. Of course, you and I disagreed with that, Hugh, but that was the consensus. And Donald Trump has done more than anyone, I think, in changing the nature of the way we look at China. Now, Xi Jinping, the neo-Maoist dictator at the top of the People's Republic of China, has done a fair amount as well. But I think Donald Trump understands that. I do think that in this term, Trump is going to be looking for ways to reach some type of agreement with Xi Jinping that would be able to have a balance of power in East Asia. And I do always want to caution the president and his advisors to recognize, of course, that there are a lot of other players in this game in East Asia, including our allies in Japan and the Republic of Korea and the Philippines. All of them, I think, are important partners, Australia, that need to be consulted if Donald Trump wants to reach some type of grand bargain with Xi Jinping.
Now, Matt, when I left the Post, I really left the Post, and I miss only two things about it. Well, I miss a few things about it, but I miss Ruth Marcus on the court, because Ruth is a very good liberal analyst of the court, and I miss David Ignatius. You referenced a column yesterday about David Ignatius. What did he say?
Well, David Ignatius of the Washington Post is well known to be a highly connected foreign policy and intelligence reporter. And I have to say, I was struck when I read his column about Pete Hegseth's remarks overseas by the way in which Ignatius said, you know what, the type of settlement that Hegseth kind of announced in Europe is not the worst that could happen. That it did suggest that America did not want to see Russia maintain its maximal aims in Ukraine by toppling the regime, by turning all of Ukraine into a Russian province, and by completely ending any attempt for Ukraine to move toward the West and to Europe. So when Ignatius says that, I paid attention, and I also saw that Elliot Cohen of SAIS, the Johns Hopkins School, he wrote in the Atlantic that it's not the time to panic if you're a supporter of Ukraine when you hear the messages from the administration. It's not going to be what the most committed supporters of Ukraine are going to want if there's a peace agreement reached, but it's not at this point looking to be the worst. And so I think that is a sign of that this new realism in the administration understands that you can't let Putin have everything he wants, because of course that will only make the world much more dangerous and America less safe.
You know, the big stick that Donald Trump carries is he gave Ukraine lethal weapons when he was president the first time. Biden screwed that up. Biden said a minor incursion wouldn't matter. Biden's going to be the worst president in my lifetime, because he wasn't all there. However, I think Donald Trump will be glad to supply weaponry to Ukraine if Putin doesn't settle for a reasonable ceasefire. Let me move on then, if I can, to Israel, because it's going to take us the rest of the half hour to talk about this. I'm very confused. My default position is we should support the Israeli government, whatever they decide to do, because they're the elected government of Israel, and they know the ground situation. I've listened to Dan Senor Part 1 with Yoav Gallant. I recommend everyone do that. I know you're talking about it on the Commentary podcast on Monday. But what do you think is going to happen tomorrow?
Well, what I anticipate is that Hamas will produce the 3 hostages it says it will release as the latest part of this ceasefire. And I believe that this will be able to keep the ceasefire in place for at least another week. I think that Donald Trump's threats this week to Hamas, as well as Bibi Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister's threats, convinced Hamas that they do need to continue along with this first phase of the hostage deal. The real question to me, Hugh, is what happens when this phase ends in a few weeks. And there, I think the likelihood of the war restarting is now very high.
I think it's 100%. But when it restarts, we'll see. So, Matt, now I want to move to J.D. Vance's speech. And stay with me as long as you can. There's a lot in that speech. So I just want to give you the floor to start for 2 minutes. We'll go to break and then come back, because I want your assessment of what the vice president said today and why he said it. Go right ahead.
Oh, you want my assessment right now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, sorry. I thought JD was going to start talking. Sorry.
Oh, no, that's just some show.
Technical difficulty. I think it was a major speech. Now, first I'd say, it's the second of 2 major speeches he gave. JD has been the vice president has been in Europe all week. He opened the week with a very interesting and important speech on artificial intelligence policy, telling the Europeans who highly regulate all these technologies that artificial intelligence is an opportunity rather than something that's a danger or a threat to the world. And I thought that was a very important speech he gave. Now he gives this speech to the Munich Security Conference, and I think this speech will be remembered for quite a long time because, like many great speeches, he went against the grain. He went against the expectation. This Munich Security Conference has been held annually for years and years, and typically you have dignitaries there talk about security matters, talk about the importance of U.S. involvement in the world. I think J.D. Vance understands all those things. What he decided to do is give a speech that said, look, I'm going to talk about something different. I'm going to talk about democracy. And what made this speech so amazing to me, Hugh, is that in front of the European community, he said, democracy is not about whether progressives rule. It's about whether the people rule.
Matt, I hope you're prepared. J.D. Vance, Tom Cotton, Mike Gallagher, you're going to be living with these guys in the public square for the rest of your life, the way that my parents lived with Nixon, and I'm kind of caught in between, but J.D. is as young as Richard Nixon was when Ike sent him off on a 17-country tour in 1953. Do you think J.D. Vance and Tom Cotton and Mike Gallagher are going to be making the weather in foreign affairs for the next 30 to 40 years?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one thing that's remarkable about this new Trump team, Hugh, is that Donald Trump...
I should have mentioned Mike Waltz as well. You're right.
Mike Waltz, yeah.
Rubio.
Even Rubio, he's something of a senior fellow.
He is.
And he's about 60 years old. You know, he's still got plenty of time left. President Trump is turning out to be the president Joe Biden said he would be. Joe Biden said in 2020 that he was going to be a transitional figure, a bridge to a new generation of Democratic leadership. That's not the way it turned out. In fact, Joe Biden's hubris, more than anything, inflation, immigration, all that helped. But Joe Biden's hubris is the reason that the Democrats lost last year. Well, what is President Trump doing? He's appointing all of these young people. He's got the youngest White House press secretary. He's got the 40-year-old vice president. He's got Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, who's 45, Elise Stefanik, 44. You have a much younger generation, a new cohort of Republicans who are rising into these positions. And you're absolutely right. They're going to be around for decades. And that's why I think it's important for Washington, including the Washington Republican establishment and all my friends, and colleagues, to recognize that this new generation has a different view of foreign policy. It is a more realist view. It is a view that is not interested in nation building, and it's much more restrained in the types of interventions it's going to support. We might disagree, but it's important that we have these disagreements civilly while understanding this new generation is going to be very powerful, and it's going to have long-lasting consequences beyond Donald Trump.
One more segment coming up with Matt Continetti. You should follow him at Continetti on X, and you should read him at AEI, and do subscribe and like the Commentary podcast. The method to my madness is that even as Donald Trump's bringing young people all the time into the administration, I'm trying to bring the next generation of sort of pundits and analysts onto the show on a regular basis, so that you get used to them, whether it's Mary Catherine Hammer or Matt Continetti. Stand tuned. I'll be right back.
The Hugh Hewitt Show returns in 5 seconds.
Short segment to conclude with Matt Continetti. We were talking about how Donald Trump is credentialing, much the way Ronald Reagan did. In Ronald Reagan's White House, the lawyers were helmed by Fred Fielding and Dick Hauser. But in that group of 7, there was a future Chief Justice of the United States named Roberts. I don't know who's in this White House counsel's office, but I'm sure they're going to get promoted. I do know all the people that Matt mentioned, from Elise Stefanik and Mike Waltz and Marco Rubio being the senior statesman, Tom Cotton and Pete Hegseth and everybody else who's a kid. It's Carolyn Levitt's 27, Matt. I think this is remarkable.
I'm an old fogey compared to
What's that? Don't say that. What's that make me? A corpse?
You're the bridge, as you just said, Hugh. You're the bridge to a new generation of pundits. I appreciate that.
Well, I wanted to ask you one completely random question. As I recall, you liked the Sword of Honor trilogy by Evelyn Waugh, right?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
All right.
Yes.
Did you I just finished Brideshead Revisited for the first time. I'm 68. Did you like that too, or were you just a Sword of Honor guy?
I'm a Sword of Honor guy, Hugh. That's the Waugh novel that I would recommend everyone read. It's about World War II. It's funny. It's filled with pathos. It's incredibly well written. I've never been able to get into Brideshead Revisited. It's just too kind of aristocratic for me, you know?
I will make a recommendation to you then. The Jeremy Irons narration of the 75th anniversary edition of Bride. I could never get into it as a book either.
That sounds pretty good. Yeah, Jeremy Irons could read the phone book, and I would probably listen to it.
The first comment under the review is, can't Jeremy Irons read everything? And I agree with that. And so,
if I were king, that'd be my first pronouncement.
I recommend that to you because I was never able to dent the book. And then I just loved every minute of it. I knew you were a Sword of Honor guy. I want to thank you, Matt Continenty. Have a great weekend. It'll be very interesting. I'll be listening to you on Monday on the next Commentary podcast. I'll be reading you wherever you write in the Washington Free Beacon and, of course, at AEI. Don't go anywhere, America. I'm coming back. I got Ben Domenech. I'm going to march him through the same set of issues in reverse order, as is my practice most weeks. So don't go anywhere. Let me remind you that our friends at AmericanFederal.com buy and sell gold. Why do they buy and sell gold? Because especially gold dropped today, $30 or so, and the market's mixed. And there's no telling where it'll be on Monday. It's just what you do to diversify. And a lot of people are selling gold because they're out of money. And a lot of people are buying gold because they're worried about inflation. And just so long as you're doing something. My plan, and you can develop a plan with Nick Grovich, is I buy every January. That's called dollar cost averaging over a lifetime. I buy as much as I can, and it's diversified. It's not even 5% of my wealth or 2% of my wealth, but it's there. It's runaway money. It's give it to the grandkids money. It's stuff you don't spend, or you can sometimes donate it to charity, but you got to call 1-800-221-7694 to talk to Nick and everyone at American Federal. Here's my guarantee. You'll find that they are transparent, honest, fast, efficient, and full of good information. They're not hustling you. They're buying and selling gold and silver. AmericanFederal.com, 1-800-221-7694. Yes.
Not just, sort of differences in the realm of, one of the things that's so funny about like seeing someone like Mayor Pete start to make noise about running for the Senate in Michigan is that one of the very first stories that comes out, of course, is that he said yes to all the same crazy stuff that Kamala Harris said yes to when she was running the first time around, including paying for, trans operations for criminals and that type of thing. And that just kind of shows you the Democrats are the ones who are in lockstep on all of this stuff, where you have this top-down approach, this radical agenda that they really pushed within the cultural space. And I think that they really have trapped themselves now into a position where, look, my friends over at Echelon Insights, Patrick Ruffini and Kristen Sanderson, they do, occasionally some of these polls. And Patrick was pointing out the other day that Jasmine Crockett got 2% in their Democrat
Wow.
poll. Okay, 2%. Now, 2% is basically nothing, but the point is that that's where Beto O'Rourke was, the last time around and that kind of thing. And guess who didn't even have a percent? Wes Moore, in Maryland, who probably, like whatever you think of Wes Moore.
He's formidable.
He's formidable, and he has a far more capable, approach to reaching, I would say, more mainstream voters than someone like Jasmine Crockett. But that's what plays. And so what you're going to end up with, I think, is a dynamic where on the Republican side of the aisle, you are going to have serious debate among serious people. And for the Democrats, they have such a weak bench. They have not allowed these younger players to contribute. They have not allowed them to learn the lessons that they needed to. And so because of that, they're just going to be firing off shots for the online crowd and keeping their coalition from learning the lessons that they need to learn in order to come back.
And I didn't even name governors. I didn't name Youngkin and DeSantis and all the other governors who are out there. I didn't name anyone. These are all Beltway people and national federal people. Ben, let's get to the issues at hand. This was a big week for everything, but let's start with the vice president's speech in Europe, which I've urged listeners to take in its entirety. I've played 6 or 7 sound bites of it. They'll be on the podcast ahead of you. And Matt, what did you make of that speech?
Well, I think that you actually already noticed this because I can't remember if you threw a like in there or something, but I made the point that it took J.D. Vance to 4 weeks to make a more meaningful and memorable speech than anything that Kamala Harris did in 4 years.
Yep.
And the truth is that speech, which I do encourage everyone, we have the full text of it too at The Spectator if people want to go to thespectator.com. And it's one of these things that I think is a document that sends an extremely strong message, and also one that already has gotten under the skin of the Europeans.
Oh, yes, it did. Oh, boy, did it get under their skin.
Yes. And here's the thing, Hugh, you and I pay attention to this, because we've seen the way that this stuff creeps. And so much of the time, Europe is ahead of the curve on these things. And then they also do not share the same level of protection for individuals for when it comes to issues of free speech and the like that we enjoy here in America. And that's something that I think was a very powerful message from the perspective of from J.D. Vance, which is consistent with his approach, by the way. This is not like he's adopted this recently. It's something that he's talked about in the past and something that's very important when it comes to stressing this importance for the West. And that's what I really do believe he's trying to represent, which is we have Western values that actually has to mean something. And it means that we don't go down the road of these authoritarian regimes down the world. And when we start to drift in that direction, there needs to be quick pushback and very loud. Otherwise, you run the danger of having these types of things, in nations that do not have those same free speech rights instilled in law, into a direction that can lead to them behaving in very authoritarian ways very easily.
Left-wing authoritarian ways. Left wing.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about fascism, but I am worried about left-wing authoritarianism. Ben, I want to cross the T. The parallel is Trump and Nixon because they were friends in New York, very different background. But the T-bar, the going down, is the J.D. Vance-Nixon ascent. Nixon begins in 1946 with the Hiss hearings. Beats Hellenhagen, Douglas. Ike taps him, and he never goes away. He resigns, but he still doesn't go away. He's always a player after a brief exile in the Elba of America San Clemente. He's back on the stage advising people. J.D. Vance breaks in with the book out of nowhere. Very much Nixon's class and background and family structure, which wasn't great, but strong, and goes to Yale Law School. Nixon goes to Duke, and Nixon goes to the Pacific, and J.D. goes to the Marines. I think Vance is going to be with us for a very long time. Do you agree?
I absolutely agree, and I think it's because he stands for something more than just the emergence of a brief coalition. He stands for a lot of the ideas that inform that direction, and he comes to it also, by the way, as someone who, even though he is from that originally, still I think has the veneer of someone who is viewed as a traitor to his class. Something that I think is very important, meaning that you go this route and then you go to the Ivy, but then you're also viewed as being someone who can critique it with the information that you've gained along the way. And that, to me, is really a powerful aspect of him and why he understands the elite and understands why they need to be reformed, rejected, and replaced. And that's something that, is, I believe, going to give him, some enormous fuel beyond just this moment. But look, we're seeing it happen right before our eyes, and it may not have as dramatic a moment as going out to the pumpkin patch, but you do have something, I think, in him that is consistent with that. And
there are certainly enough Chinese spies in the country to allow him to do that. Well, we'll just have to. We've got at least as many Chinese spies running around the country as we did Soviet spies and co-opted people. So don't count that out yet. I'll be right. And maybe Senator Cotton will do that. Over my shoulder is his book, 7 Things You Can't Say About China. He'll be here next week. Ben, you're not a prophet. I'm not the son of a prophet. We don't know what will happen by Saturday sundown in Israel. But boy, there have been a lot of different signals. My default position is support whatever the government decides to do in Israel because they're our ally and they know more than we do and they know what their citizens want. What do you think that's going to be?
Oh, man. It's very difficult to be someone who is optimistic at this point about what needs to happen. I concur with you, obviously, Hugh, and I think that there's going to be some very clear messages sent here in terms of what comes next. Now, I'm someone who wants peace and wants to not have to go down the route of the kind of things that I think are more than likely not to happen. But in terms of the expectations that we have at this point, and given the signals that you and I have been paying attention to, there is a path back to peace that is going to involve further loss of life, and I think that unfortunately that's going to be what has to happen. But look, in terms of our perspective on Israel, we know this administration We know that they have the clarity of perspective on this that the Biden administration totally lacked. That they, saw everything through the lens of domestic politics and through the politics of their own coalition. We don't have that problem here. And I'm very confident in terms of the leadership that we have that we'll be ready to support them in decisions that they make in order to maintain their own security.
And have you listened to Dan Senor's interview yet with Yoav Gallant?
I have not.
Well, it's really bracing. And it's a very interesting. He wanted to blitz Lebanon on October 11th because he knew about the pagers and the walkie-talkie. He had a whole plan. He lays it out, and it's really making waves in Israel. But I don't think it will affect tomorrow. Whatever they do, whatever Netanyahu and his government do, is fine by me. And I think Trump will go along with it. That's the key thing? Trump's not going to insist they escalate for the sake of escalation, is he?
No, I don't think so, and I don't think that's his attitude at the moment either. I mean, I think that when he speaks about these things, and we can obviously have perspective now on the different approaches and the way that he's, I think, using this second term differently, speaking differently. He's entering in a much different circumstance than he did last time around, facing so many challenges around the world. Ukraine was obviously the focus this week, but there's so many things that I think, are on his plate. And he wants this to be a problem where Israel solves it. They've been solving it. We are there to support them. And this administration, like I said, is clear in terms of their direction in a way that the last administration was spastic, was ill-formed, and frankly, again, was torn in different directions by their own domestic political coalition and remains so today.
Oh, boy, they're shattered.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Tell me, which side are you on? Which side are you on? We'll fight against George. We'll fight Elon Musk. No Elon's kept within our walls. We'll fight from dawn to dusk.
Welcome back, America. Ben Domenech is my guest on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Ben, I have milked this. I've probably played it 10 times, and Harley laughs every time.
Is that the new performance at the Kennedy Center? Oh, no. that didn't have enough of a drag element to it. By the way, Hugh, did you see that they were protesting the removal of the drag shows at the Kennedy Center by having a drag dance performance in front of the Kennedy Center? Are they trying to make us more happy?
I guess so. This makes me happy just watching it again. Ben, let's get serious. There was a Hill article yesterday, and it really set me off. People attacking Elbridge Colby. Now, I'm not a good friend of Elbridge. He's been on the show a couple of times. I've met him a couple of times around town. I didn't read his book. I know he's a China hawk. Some people think he's ultra MAGA. I don't. I think he's just a China hawk with a priority. I want Ukraine to get whatever Ukraine needs. He doesn't. I'm told. I'm not even sure. And I'm looking forward to his hearings because they're going to be very interesting. No one's dummy, Bridge Colby. What do you think about that nomination?
Well, I think Bridge is a very smart guy. I did read his book and interviewed him about it, and I think his perspective is a needed and nuanced one. I'm not sure that that's going to be something that necessarily comes through in the hearing, given the level of questioning that he's going to have to endure. But one of the things that I do think people should understand about Bridge is he views this as a situation in flatly, realist terms about what we're going to have to do in order to make commitments within the Pacific to make sure and expect commitments from our allies in the region to ensure that China does not do the things that they have been telegraphing that they intend to do for a very long time, not just related to Taiwan, but related to the whole of the Pacific and the control that they can exercise over the worldwide trade and everything else is already something that's top of mind for this White House. So I'm not surprised that he ended up in the admin. He's someone who has a good deal of fans on that kind of neo-realist side of things, but I don't view him as someone who should be, viewed with any kind of skepticism by those, who want America to take bold stands around the world. I just think that he thinks in terms of dollars and cents and, how much are we actually willing to spend and how do we spend that right in order to make sure that we aren't just wastefully throwing money at a problem that we know exists without thinking through what are the actual steps and tools that are needed to solve it, and what can we rely on when it comes to our allies in order for them to take up their share as well.
Yeah, I'll take this moment to recommend to everyone who did not hear Admiral Montgomery, retired United States Navy, on the program yesterday, detailing why we need Virginia-class submarine production to pick up fast. It is our weapon of choice to deter China, and we got to have more of them, and they got to be repaired more quickly, and we need new submarine shipyards. That brings me, superpower competition will put China off to the side for a period of time, Ben. The President Trump, talked to Putin and President Zelensky this week. And he did it in that order. But a lot of people say Putin and President Zelensky for a reason, because President Zelensky is legit and Putin's a dictator. But Trump just wants an acceptable deal. Do you think he moved the ball forward this week towards that?
Yeah, but I think that this was also just the opening conversation. I mean, this is not going to be something that happens overnight, as much as people might wish it to be clear. But look, he's been very much, sending the signal for a long time that, this is going to be something that has to be a deal that is worked out. And I think, the priority for him, and he stressed it again this week, is that he wants an end to war. He wants an end to the war that does not lead to a situation where Russia is just coming back and doing the same thing again in a couple of years, certainly not on his watch. And that's something that I think he wants to achieve. And as much as I think we can hope for that, we also have to be cognizant that there is going to be a lot of outside noise on either side of this that doesn't really have any clue about the way that deals like this are brokered or the way that the negotiations work. You're going to hear a bunch of the same people saying that Trump is a tool of Putin and that he's being naive and things like that. Or on the flip side, that he's not shoring up enough the support for Zelensky or something like that. That's not the case as I see it at all. In fact, I think he's just being clear-eyed about something where, unfortunately, the prior administration was, again, completely not clear-eyed. They took too long to give Ukraine the resources that they needed, and then they didn't move them quickly enough, and it made the war prolong, and it's made things worse, and it's made more people die.
President Trump brought up the biggest mistake of all, which was the Afghanistan debacle, followed by the second, a minor incursion, which Joe Biden actually said, and Trump said that was
the minor
stupid.
Incursion thing. I'm glad that he brought it up again.
Yes.
People seem to have memory hold this. It's not. I mean, that was such an invitation, and it was one of these things that you had back-to-back instances of the display of American weakness, of our incapacity to handle something like the Afghan withdrawal. You had him tail between his legs on it, and then you have this minor incursion comment, which is again, basically saying, oh, well, we'll invite, you can do a little bit. And it's like, no, you can't do that. You can't be a little bit pregnant. This is not a situation that the Biden administration, with all of its, vaunted foreign policy expertise that we were told by the media for so long, I mean, they made an absolute botch of it.
All right, I want to close with a media question, Ben. Are you under contract? No, you're with Fox, so you can talk about CNN. I don't want to put people in a position they've fallen apart. They got Scott Jennings' window dressing, and they've just absolutely crashed and burned. What happened?
I don't understand why CNN is so dedicated to making such terrible television. And by that I mean it'd be one thing if they were trying to make good television and failing, but they're dedicated to making bad television where they bring somebody on and basically get mad at them if they're not just a punching bag. They shut them down, they interrupt them, they fact check them with things that are not true, and it's absolutely terrible television to watch unless you just want to see people screaming at each other. I tried to watch one of those segments the other day, Hugh, and there was so much talking over each other, I could barely follow it. And it's like, do you think this is good television?
No, I'm not. I don't have a vendetta against Caitlin Collins. It's just she stepped in it repeatedly, saying that we're on the brink of a constitutional crisis. The last real constitutional crisis we had was the Civil War. FDR got close to one in 1937 with packing the court.
You know what's a constitutional crisis, Hugh? The president pardoning his son.
That's actually allowed for by the Constitution.
Yes,
it might be a political crisis, but it's not a constitutional crisis.
I know.
They want viral moments, and they can't get them with bad television.
Oh my gosh! I mean, Hugh, We deserve a better class of television, and that's why this was the podcast election, because people can actually talk and have a conversation the way
you're
that
the first person who
with
said
so many
that.
people.
You're the first person who said that I've heard. Did you invent that? The podcast election?
I've been saying it for a little bit now. Yes.
Well, kudos to you. I'm going to steal it and try and memory hole that Ben Domenech came up with it. Ben Domenech can be followed on X at B Domenech. You can read him at The Spectator, and you can see him on Fox News. I appreciate it when he goes along with me. Ben Domenech, have a great Valentine's Day weekend. I hope you're treating your wife well and that you have a great celebration for Valentine's Day weekend. Don't go anywhere, America. I'll be right back. In fact, I might even talk to some of you. 1-800-520-1234. 1-800-520-1234 connects you to me, Hugh Hewitt. I feel like I'm on a plague ship. You know, Lucimo is sick. He's here, not producing as usual. And he's in there doing something. I don't know what he's doing. Maybe he's doing Dwayne's World. I would recommend Dwayne's World to you. And the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt is flat out with that same cold that Mrs. Dwayne had last week, and Dwayne's got this. I'm trying to avoid everyone because I don't want to get sick, but I think I am. But I didn't give a very good market report last hour, so I want to do it again because American Federal is a great sponsor, and some of you actually want to know and don't want to look it up. AmericanFederal.com. You call 1-800-221-7694 if you're going to buy or sell gold, and this is a freebie because I missed it up last hour. I knew it was a mixed market. Mixed markets are never any interest to people. The Dow was down 0.37, the S&P was down 0.44%, and the NASDAQ was up 0.81%. So a mixed market. Who knows what's going on there? Gold dropped to $2,894 an ounce. So if you were waiting for the dip, that's a dip. I don't know why. I have no idea why. That's not. I don't buy gold because of the price. I buy gold at the same time every year. And if you want to plan on how to diversify, call up Nick Grovich and his team, 1-800-221-7694. If you are a numinist, I hope I'm saying that correctly. If you are a person who collects coins, Nick will also talk to you because that's his passion. His business is buying and selling gold, and he does it in a straightforward, transparent way. And call volume's way up, and it's because I've been telling you now for 3 months, honest, transparent, straightforward, efficient, quick, everything you want in a buyer or seller of gold at 1-800-221-7694. And a nice guy. And I know everyone who works for him is a nice guy. So call him up. 1-800-221-7694. Now I'm going to switch over and take a phone call, which is really rare. I do calls every now and then. Garrity is supposed to be here, but he's probably got the cold too. So I'm going to talk instead with Robert in Phoenix, Arizona. Hi, Robert.
Hey, Hugh, thanks for taking my call.
My pleasure.
Hey, how great it is to have a real leader driving the bus.
Many real leaders.
The presidency has beat up George W. It beat up Obama. H.W. was a hero. He was, he didn't age as hard. Donald Trump is handsome as hell.
You mean he's gaining energy from the office?
Donald Trump's playing with house cards. They couldn't do nothing to stop him.
Well, what's interesting is Hamilton writes in Federalist 70 that energy in the executive is the prime ingredient in successful governance. And he's got energy. He got so much energy. People are, I don't know how people keep up with this, but the world requires it.
How about this one, what he should do on a Friday afternoon?
Oh, he plays golf.
To get to Chuck the Schmuck Schumer.
You know what? He doesn't have to even pay attention to him. In fact, I'm going to play again my favorite video of the week. Thank you, Robert. My phone number is 1-800-520-1234. Can we cue up, Harley, my favorite video of the week? Because I just love listening to it. It's left-wingers outside of the Department of, I think, Labor trying to revive a 1931 union organization.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on? Tell me, which side are you on?
0, 1, 2,
Which side
3, 4,
are
5,
you
6, 7, 8.
We'll fight
9, 10,
against George.
11,
We'll fight Elon Musk.
11 people, 12.
No Elon's kept within our walls.
How tall
We'll
is the
fight
woman
from
on the
dawn
front
to
left?
dusk. Oh, which side are you
How tall is
on? Which side are you on?
What do you think, Adam?
Tell me which side
Is she 4'8"? And then she's standing next to the guy with the fro. It is the funniest video that they have done in a very long time. Not funny. J.D. Vance meeting with President Zelensky in Munich today, cut number 6. Cut number 6. Okay. Harley.
We're, of course, happy to welcome the Ukrainian delegation led by President Zelensky. We had a number of fruitful conversations, a number of things for us to follow up and work on. And fundamentally, the goal is, as President Trump outlined it, we want the war to come to a close. We want the killing to stop, but we want to achieve a durable, lasting peace, not the kind of peace that's going to have Eastern Europe in conflict.
I want you
just
to
a couple
note
years
that
down the road.
Secretary
So we have
Rubio is
a
on
number
his
of
right, and on his left is General Kellogg, and President Zelensky is nodding. They're going to get to a deal. Might not be quick, but it's going to be durable. Donald Trump, before I go to the calls, I'm going to be magnanimous, and I'm going to go to the state up north. I'm going to talk to a Pittsburgh person, and then I'm going to go to Florida, and if possible, I'll get to Minnesota cold. But first, Donald Trump in the Oval moments ago, cut number 8.
Mr. President, Doge workers arrived today, Gavin Clagger and others arrived today at the IRS. Do you expect to close the IRS, or what are you expecting?
No, I don't expect it, but I think that the Internal Revenue Service will be looked at like everybody else. Just about everybody's going to be looked at. So it's they're doing a hell of a job. It's an amazing job they're doing. And you know, that force is building these, I call it the force of super geniuses, but it's building. And you know, they go up and they talk to some of the people about certain deals, and the people get all tongue-tied. They can't talk because these people get it. They're very smart people. We need smart people. Yes.
I love that. I love that. I love the stupid question becomes an opportunity for him to display confidence in his team. Cut number 9.
Also, they mentioned dishwashers and sinks and showers and the whole thing. We're going to get rid of those restrictions. You have many places where they have water. They have so much water they don't know what to do with it. But people buy a house, they turn on the sink and water barely comes out. They take a shower, water barely comes out. And it's an unnecessary restriction. And basically,
I believe that the shower vote is underappreciated. I believe that the shower vote, as a person who takes long and ridiculously long showers, I believe that the shower vote is deeply, deeply underappreciated, as is the single flush vote. They want to be able to do it with the single flush, and I think that's an underappreciated demo. President's talking about building houses. He knows what he's talking about. Okay, let's go to that state up north. Jerry, I'm being generous. I'm going to talk to someone from your part of the woods.
Buddy, I love your show.
Thank you.
Hey, Hugh, all these judges that are going against Donald Trump, against the Constitution, there's a case that Eileen Cannon used to dispense of Jack Smith.
That's not applicable to this.
It's not, but he can use it to go after a lot of people and a lot of agencies.
No, because Jack Smith was wrongly appointed as a special counsel because he'd never gone through advice and consent. Judge Cannon was correct. These judges have to be appealed. And when they're appealed, they will be overruled or the SCOTUS will get involved. I'm not worried about it. Judges are wrong a lot. It's not a constitutional crisis. Thank you. That was the one person I took this year from that state up north. All right. I'm going to try a Steelers fan. Hello, Rob.
Hello, Hugh. Hey, I was just thinking, since we already have a confirmed Secretary of the Treasury and a confirmed Attorney General, why don't we just stop these judges from sidelining Elon Musk and let those confirmed secretaries do the investigations and just have Musk advise them?
I think Scott Bessent and Pam Bondi have big portfolios that do not include auditing other agencies, and Doge is developing a particular expertise. This is what I like about it. Start with the small agencies and grow. There is an administrative conference of the United States. I used to be a member of it, and they are mired in expertise. What they need are these young guns who come rolling in. They're learning the language of the bureaucracy. They're learning the tricks. They're finding the waste. They're firing the frauds. And we don't want Scott Bessent not running for example, sanctions department and Department of Treasury in coordination with Department of Commerce, and we absolutely need Pam Bondi to go after bad guys, cartels, foreign agent registration acts, and serious crime. So they got real things to do. Thank you, Rob. In the Florida Panhandle. Hello, George.
Hi, yeah, this is George. I want to thank you for turning a talk show into a listening show for a moment. Very generous of you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
One of my favorite shows. I love to watch you. So I have an idea that I've been shopping around, and I'm having great success talking to the average Democrat on the street who are willing to give Trump a second chance with this idea. So you know it's got to be good. So I simply ask them, can't we all agree that corruption in government's got to go, and that the focus has to be on getting rid of the corrupt money? But how do we do that? Why do the politicians need all that corrupt money? It's because the cost of advertising is so high, and advertising is 90% of a campaign. So my idea is simply this. Create a YouTube channel for voting. Call it VoteTube, where candidates can have free airtime, and they all have equal airtime. And then we turn it into something like you ever buy a car online, so that voters can go on and search for the subjects they want, narrow it down, and then listen to all sides of the story in a few minutes. And additionally, you throw in, if you want to, you can throw in your voter ID, and now you can comment, follow, and now you become part of the conversation. And it also eliminates all these expensive polls that people take.
Well, there are going to be a lot of people listening to that because online is the future of campaigning, and YouTube. That's why I have a Hugh Hewitt YouTube channel now. It's because, especially Generation Z, they don't listen to the radio, they don't watch television, they watch their screens. And if you're not on YouTube, and I would ask everyone to like and subscribe to the Hugh Hewitt channel, and you'll see everything that matters. Hey, thank you, George. Kurt in Minnesota, cold. Last call, Kurt.
Hugh, it's been a long time. I just want to say you have the greatest show. It is like fine wine. It has gotten better with age, and you have the greatest guests, which is why you probably don't take calls from dummies like me anymore. But I miss chatting with you, and you have the greatest show.
What about Dwayne? Dwayne isn't aging like fine wine. He's turned. It's vinegar.
Well, I got you on Salem Network, so now I can see Dwayne. And
are you watching right now?
Easy on Dwayne.
Take a look at Dwayne right now. The Dwayne cam is up and running. Go over to the Dwayne cam again, Harley. Give him a good look at Dwayne. See? He's sick. Thank you so much, George. I appreciate it. It is time for Tarzana Joe, the poet laureate of the Hugh Hewitt Show. Hello, Joe.
Hello, Hugh. I may not be the son of a prophet, but I may be a prophet. Because last week I wrote a poem about pennies and their demise, and this week the penny went bye-bye.
Please don't say anything bad about me in your poem.
I went back to 2021 and I wrote a poem called Schumer's Trillions, where I predicted that it was impossible to efficiently spend $4 trillion. And I think that proved prophetic.
Yes.
And that is covered in today's poem. There's a sunny yellow school bus I remember from my youth. It met me on the corner for my journey toward the truth. The driver's name was Gino, and when our trip was done, I stumbled down the steps and into PS 41. The school bus is an icon, a symbol in this nation for unity, community, and solid education. How could this stately symbol, in which our trust is placed, transform into a witness of mismanagement and waste? For in the name of climate change, which everyone discusses, we coughed up in the millions for some sleek electric buses. But the company went bankrupt some unseen circumstance. We didn't get all the buses that we paid for in advance. Explain to me in simple words, as if my brain expired, how you can go kaput when sales are subsidized and required. Like Doge, we ask the question, for we all demand to know, with unprecedented spending, where did all the money go? Is it kickbacks or incompetence? I say this under oath. Based on all the evidence, I judge it to be both. I look like Bernie Sanders right now. Where did all the money go? That's what I want to say.
No, you don't. Joe,
Where
you
did all the
don't.
money go?
You look
Tarzan
healthy.
Joe.
Can you sing Which Side Are We On? No. Tarzana Joe, that will be posted at tarzanajoe.com, I assume.
Yes, sir.
And
Just
if
a
anyone
moment.
has a poem need, they can write you at tarzanajoe@reagan.com. Rates are reasonable. They're not a penny.
Not a penny.
Not a penny. And
Unless-
by the way, I did think of you when Donald Trump announced the end of pennies.
If
When
he'd
you
only
rhyme, people notice. Thank you, Joe. And I want to say to everyone, have a great Valentine's weekend. Say a prayer for the hostages, all of them, every one of them. And for the soul, if you're Catholic, of the departed David Allen White, our beloved professor and doctor who passed away this week. And for everyone in your life who's having lonely times on this Valentine's Day, encourage them as well. And for Dwayne, the plague ship Dwayne next door, he's slumped down in there, slowly succumbing to whatever it is that has got him, but it's got him and he's slumping away. I will be back in the next hour. Dr. Larry Arnn is coming up, the Hillsdale Dialogue right ahead, as we talk about Donald Trump and the foreign policy change from the Biden years.